My name is Caroline Mercer, and I thought Christmas this year would finally bring me peace. After 6 long years serving overseas in the Army, I had finally arranged to come home and surprise my family for the holidays. But just 3 days before Christmas, a text from my mom shattered everything I thought I knew about home, family, and the truth waiting for me behind our front door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hum of the airplane still rang in my ears as I sat in a small diner near the bus station, sipping burnt coffee and staring out at the snowy streets of Colorado Springs. Coming home was supposed to feel like relief, like stepping back into a warm, safe place after years of chaos and sandstorms and sleepless nights in faraway deserts. Instead, I felt restless. I kept checking my phone, rereading the last message from my mom over and over, as though maybe the words would change if I looked at them enough. Caroline, before you come home, there's something you need to know. Please call me as soon as you can. That was it. No explanation, just a cliffhanger that had set my nerves buzzing since the night it came through. I had been counting down to this holiday for months, through all the grueling physical drills, the endless briefings, and the nights where sleep wouldn't come because memories of patrols and ambushes played in my head like a movie on loop. I told myself, just get through it. Just get to Christmas. You'll be home with Mom, with Aunt Linda, and little Jake, your younger cousin who'd grown up too much since you last saw him. There would be hot cocoa, the smell of pine from the tree, laughter echoing through the living room. It was supposed to be my reward, my return to normal. But Mom's cryptic text twisted that picture into something uncertain. I had been close with my mom all my life. She raised me on her own after my father walked out when I was 10, and I grew up watching her sacrifice everything to keep us afloat. She was a nurse, working double shifts most weeks, and I remembered so many nights where I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to find her asleep at the kitchen table, medical charts and bills scattered in front of her. She taught me what resilience looked like, and maybe that's why I enlisted. Maybe that's why I felt like I had to prove myself to show her that her sacrifices had built someone strong. But now, as I stared at that text, I wondered if something had happened to her. A diagnosis? An accident? Or maybe it was worse. The last time I had spoken to her, 2 weeks earlier, she had sounded tired but cheerful. She had teased me about how I still hadn't told her what gift I wanted. She said she had something special planned for when I came home. There was no sign of distress, no hint that she was hiding something from me. So why this sudden urgency? Why ask me to call but then not answer when I did? I'd left 3 voicemails since then, each one a little more desperate than the last. Silence answered every time. I thought about booking a ticket straight to Denver, to just show up at the front door and demand answers in person, but something told me to wait. To be patient, though patience was never one of my virtues. Years in the Army had taught me discipline, sure, but patience was still a battle. My commanding officers used to joke that I had a fire in my veins. Quick to act, quick to fight, and sometimes too quick to question. Now, that fire burned restlessly inside me as I tried to figure out what my mom's message meant. The snow outside thickened, covering the sidewalks in white blankets, and I found myself staring at families huddled together in scarves and coats, their laughter muffled by the cold. I felt like an outsider, sitting alone with my duffel bag at my feet, a soldier without a mission. Coming home was supposed to be simple. You walk through the door, you hug the people you love, you eat too much food and drink too much cocoa. But nothing in my life had ever been simple, and it seemed even this long-awaited homecoming was about to become complicated. I glanced again at the text. There's something you need to know. My chest tightened. Maybe it was about someone else. Aunt Linda had struggled with her health for years. Maybe something had happened there. Or maybe... My thoughts went darker. Maybe it had to do with my father, the man who had left us without a backward glance. Could he have come back into the picture after all these years? And if so, why now? Why during Christmas when all I wanted was peace? That thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I had buried my father in my past, boxed him away in a part of my memory I rarely opened. But Mom had never remarried, never really dated anyone seriously again, as though a part of her had always been waiting. If he had returned, if he had reached out to her, then maybe the truth she wanted to tell me was tied to that. The possibility gnawed at me, and I didn't know if I had the strength to face it. I rubbed my temples and closed my eyes, trying to focus on the present. The holiday lights in the diner glowed red and green, casting cheerful reflections on the window. The jukebox in the corner played an old Bing Crosby Christmas song. It all felt like a cruel contrast to the storm building inside me. I had survived deployments, firefights, and the loneliness of barracks thousands of miles from home. But nothing had prepared me for this. The fear of what waited for me on the other side of a text message from the one person who had always been my anchor. 3 days. That was all I had left before I was supposed to walk back into my childhood home. 3 days to figure out what Mom was trying to tell me, or to brace myself for whatever truth she had been keeping hidden all along. The bus rattled along the highway as the Colorado landscape blurred by in patches of gray sky and white snow. I had managed to book a seat on the late afternoon route heading north, which would take me closer to the little town of Pine Ridge where I grew up. My duffel bag sat heavy in the overhead rack, stuffed with the remnants of my Army life, uniforms folded with precision, medals tucked into a side pocket, and a few worn letters from my mom that I'd read so often they felt like fragile artifacts. As the wheels hummed against the frozen pavement, I tried to steady my thoughts, but they kept circling back to the same uneasy question. What could my mother have to tell me that she couldn't put into words over the phone? The passengers around me seemed absorbed in their own lives. A young couple whispered to each other with excitement about seeing family, their toddler fast asleep in the mother's arms. An older man in a thick wool coat dozed against the window, snoring softly. Across the aisle, a college student tapped away at a laptop with earphones in, his screen glowing with lines of text I couldn't decipher. Their lives looked simple, ordinary, and in that moment I envied them. I had once belonged to that world of predictability, where the biggest worry was finishing homework on time or whether there'd be enough pie left at Thanksgiving. The Army had stripped that away, and now coming home should have meant returning to familiarity. But Mom's silence, her cryptic message and refusal to answer, cast a long shadow over the trip. I replayed our last Christmas together in my head. It had been 6 years ago, right before my first deployment. The tree had been trimmed with old handmade ornaments from my childhood, popsicle stick stars, cotton ball snowmen, and Mom had made her famous cranberry bread, the scent filling every corner of the house. I remember Aunt Linda laughing in the kitchen as Jake, then barely 8, tore through his presents with the wild energy of a kid who believed in Santa. And me, standing at the edge of it all, already feeling half gone because I knew I was leaving for basic training right after New Year's. Mom had cried quietly that night when she hugged me, though she tried to hide it. It was the last Christmas we spent together, and I had clung to that memory like a lifeline during cold nights overseas. The idea that this homecoming could shatter that perfect image left me with a pit in my stomach. I tried calling Mom again, holding my phone in a tight grip as the bus curved around icy roads. It rang and wang, then went to voicemail. My voice cracked as I left another message, trying to keep my tone light, though I knew desperation seeped through. Hey, Mom, it's me again. I'm on my way home. Just please call me back, okay? I need to hear your voice. I ended the call and stared at the black screen, wishing it would light up with her name. It didn't. The bus ride stretched on, every minute pulling me closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted. I thought about my younger years in Pine Ridge, our modest house with the green shutters, the way the snow piled so high in winter that I used to build tunnels with neighborhood kids, and Mom calling me in for hot chocolate when my mittens were soaked through. Life hadn't been perfect. We'd struggled with money, with my father's absence, and with the constant weight of responsibilities, but home had always meant safety. It had been the one place where I could breathe. If that foundation was cracked now, if something had changed so drastically that Mom was afraid to even tell me over the phone, then what was I coming back to? When the bus finally pulled into the small depot near Pine Ridge, dusk was settling in, painting the horizon in shades of purple and orange. I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped out into the biting cold. My boots crunched against the icy pavement as I scanned the lot. Aunt Linda had promised to pick me up, and sure enough, her old Ford sedan idled near the curb, steam puffing from the exhaust. She waved when she saw me, her smile wide, though her eyes looked tired.
From the exhaust. She waved when she saw me, her smile wide, though her eyes looked tired. I slid into the passenger seat, greeted by the familiar smell of peppermint gum and car air freshener. "Caroline!" Aunt Linda exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug before I even had time to shut the door. "Look at you, my brave girl, home at last." I smiled, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Hey, Aunt Linda. Thanks for picking me up." She squeezed my hand before pulling back onto the road. "Of course, honey. Your mom's been so excited to see you. She talks about it nonstop." Her words made me tense. Excited? Then why the strange text? Why the silence? I tried to keep my tone casual. "I've been trying to call her. She hasn't picked up." Aunt Linda's grip on the steering wheel tightened, and she glanced at me briefly before fixing her eyes back on the road. "She's been busy. You know how she is, running around, making sure Christmas is perfect." Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. I knew Aunt Linda well enough to catch the way her voice wavered. Something was off. I leaned back against the seat, letting the hum of the engine fill the silence between us. If she was hiding something, I'd find out soon enough. As we drove through the familiar streets of Pine Ridge, holiday lights twinkled from rooftops, and kids bundled in puffy jackets tossed snowballs under the glow of street lamps. It all looked so normal, so unchanged, as though time had stood still since the day I left. But inside me, unease grew heavier. I wanted to believe Aunt Linda, to believe that Mom's text had been nothing more than nerves or exhaustion. Yet, every instinct I'd honed in the Army told me otherwise. Something was waiting at home, and I was walking straight into it. When we finally pulled up in front of the old house with its green shutters and snow-covered porch, I stared at the warm glow from the windows. It looked just as I remembered, but I couldn't shake the feeling that once I walked through that door, the life I thought I was returning to would no longer exist. The porch steps creaked under my boots as I followed Aunt Linda toward the front door, the cold air biting my cheeks. Every detail of the house stirred something deep inside me. The faded wreath Mom always reused year after year, the dented mailbox that Jake once crashed his bike into, the faint glow of Christmas lights framing the windows. I should have felt comfort. I should have felt like I was finally home. Instead, my stomach knotted tighter with every step, a warning I couldn't ignore. Aunt Linda glanced back at me as she pulled the storm door open. Her smile stretched a little too wide, like she was trying to reassure me before I even crossed the threshold. I pushed open the door and was immediately greeted by the smell of cinnamon and pine. The living room looked like a scene from one of those glossy holiday magazines. The Christmas tree was decorated to perfection, strands of tinsel catching the light, red and gold ornaments gleaming. Stockings hung neatly over the fireplace, and in the corner, a stack of wrapped presents waited to be opened. But the thing that caught my attention wasn't the decorations. It was the sound of silence. The house, usually filled with chatter and clatter this time of year, seemed unnervingly still. "Mom?" My voice carried down the hall. I dropped my duffel by the couch, my heart pounding. I wanted to hear her footsteps rushing toward me, to feel her arms wrap around me like they always did. Instead, there was a pause, a moment too long before I finally heard her voice from the kitchen. "Caroline?" she called, and then she appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked older than I remembered. Her blonde hair, which was vibrant, had more streaks of gray, and her face was lined with exhaustion she couldn't mask. But her eyes, those familiar blue eyes, lit up the moment they landed on me. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, and then she rushed forward, pulling me into her arms. I clung to her, inhaling the scent of her familiar lavender lotion, and for a moment the world tilted back into place. "I missed you so much," I said into her shoulder. "I missed you too," she murmured, squeezing me tighter. But as we pulled apart, I noticed her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze flicked briefly toward Aunt Linda, something unspoken passing between them. I caught it. They were keeping something from me. Dinner that night felt almost normal on the surface. Mom had gone all out. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, her famous cranberry bread. We sat around the table, Aunt Linda chatting about her neighbor's endless Christmas decorations, Jake showing me his new obsession with model airplanes. I laughed at his antics, grateful for the distraction. But every time I glanced at Mom, I caught the flicker of worry shadowing her expression. She barely touched her food, her hands fidgeting in her lap whenever she thought no one was looking. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Mom," I said quietly, interrupting Jake's story, "what's going on? You texted me that I needed to know something, and you haven't answered any of my calls."
The table went still. Aunt Linda set down her fork with a clink, and Jake looked between us, confused. Mom lowered her eyes, her shoulders tensing as though bracing for impact. "Caroline, sweetheart, I wanted to wait until you were here," she said softly. There's something I need to tell you, but tonight I just wanted us to be together. Can we please just enjoy this meal first?" Her plea tugged at me, but frustration burned hotter. "Mom, I've been going crazy for 3 days. I need to know." Her lips trembled. For a moment, I thought she would finally say it, but then she forced a smile, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Tomorrow, I promise. Tonight, let's just eat." The rest of the meal dragged on, tension simmering under every word. When the dishes were cleared and Jake had gone off to play his video games, I found myself pacing the living room, my hands clenched into fists. Aunt Linda sat quietly in the recliner, watching me with worried eyes. Finally, she broke the silence. "Caroline, give her a little time. She's been under a lot of stress." I stopped pacing and turned on her. "Do you know what this is about?" Aunt Linda hesitated, then looked away. "It's not my place. This is your mom's to tell." Her answer only fueled my unease. I went upstairs to my old room, hoping sleep would dull the edge of my anxiety. The room was almost untouched since I'd left. Posters of old rock bands still taped to the walls, the quilt Mom had sewn for me folded neatly at the foot of the bed. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling, but I couldn't shake the image of Mom's haunted expression at dinner. Whatever secret she was holding onto, it was eating her alive. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall. I sat up just in time to see Mom pause outside my door, her hand hovering near the knob. For a moment, I thought she would come in, sit on the edge of my bed and finally tell me what had been weighing on her, but she didn't. She lingered there for a long moment, then turned and walked away, her steps soft against the carpet. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding, knowing tomorrow wouldn't wait any longer. The truth was coming, whether I was ready or not, and deep down, I had the sinking feeling that this homecoming would change everything I thought I knew about my family, about the home I had fought so hard to return to. The next morning, I woke up to the faint sound of clattering in the kitchen and the smell of coffee brewing. For a split second, I could pretend everything was normal, that I was just home for Christmas after years away, that my biggest worry was whether Mom had remembered to make her sugar cookies with the green sprinkles. But the memory of her voice from the night before, quiet and evasive, pulled me back into reality. Something wasn't right, and today I wasn't going to let it slide. I dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, ran a brush through my hair, and went downstairs with determination simmering beneath my skin. Mom was at the counter, her back turned as she poured batter into a skillet. Pancakes, her old weekend tradition. She glanced over her shoulder as I entered, her smile polite but worn. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" "Fine," I answered, though my restless tossing and turning had left me exhausted. I sat at the table, watching her every move. She looked fragile in a way I'd never seen before, her shoulders slightly hunched and her hands trembling as she flipped the pancake. This wasn't the strong, steady woman who had raised me, the nurse who had pulled double shifts to keep a roof over our heads. This was someone weighed down by secrets. Aunt Linda shuffled into the room a few minutes later, yawning as she tightened her robe around her. She greeted me cheerfully, poured herself coffee, and sat across from me. But her eyes darted toward Mom, and I caught the silent question in them. Would today be the day? Mom placed a plate of pancakes in front of me, along with a bottle of maple syrup. She urged me gently, "Eat. You've lost weight. Army food must not be as good as mine." I tried to smile, but it felt stiff. "Mom, we need to talk." Her hands froze on the handle of the skillet. The paws stretched, the air thick between us. Finally, she sighed and set the can aside, wiping her hands on a towel. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I promised you I'd tell you." Aunt Linda shifted uneasily in her seat, as though she didn't want to witness what was coming. I leaned forward, my heart hammering. "Then tell me, what's going on?" Mom pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down, her face pale. She clasped her hands together tightly, her knuckles white. For a moment, she just stared at them, gathering the courage to speak. "Caroline, there's something I should have told you a long time ago. I wanted to protect you. I thought keeping it from you was the best thing, but I can't hide it anymore." Her words sent a chill through me. "What do you mean? Protect me from what?" She lifted her eyes and they glistened with tears. "It's about your father."
The mention of him was like a spark in dry tinder. My chest tightened, anger and confusion tangling together. What about him? He left us. End of story. Mom shook her head slowly. "That's what I let you believe. But it wasn't the whole truth. He didn't just leave, Caroline. He was forced to." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I stared at her in disbelief. Forced to? That made no sense. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Aunt Linda cleared her throat, her eyes fixed on the mug of coffee in her hands. "Caroline, your dad, he got involved in things he shouldn't have. Dangerous people. Your mom was terrified, and she thought the safest thing for you was to believe he was gone. But he never stopped keeping an eye on you." My head spun. Memories came flooding back. Flashes of moments that suddenly felt heavier. The times I'd caught a glimpse of a man at the edge of the schoolyard when I was little, the occasional anonymous birthday card with no signature, the sense of being watched during high school soccer games. I had brushed it all off as coincidence, imagination, or kindness from strangers. Now it twisted into a different possibility. "Are you saying he's been around all this time?" Mom nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, he couldn't be here openly. It would have put you in danger, but yes, he's always been there, watching, protecting in his own way." I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Anger surged through me. "You lied to me! You let me hate him for years, thinking he abandoned us, thinking he abandoned me. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Mom flinched, her hands trembling. "I know, sweetheart, I know I failed you, but I was trying to keep you safe. If you knew the truth back then, you might have tried to find him. And those people, they would have used you to get to him." I paced across the kitchen, my fists clenched. I had faced enemy fire, navigated minefields, and patched up bleeding comrades under fire, but nothing had prepared me for this kind of betrayal. "So what now?" I asked bitterly. "Why tell me this right before Christmas? Why now?" Mom took a shaky breath, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Because he reached out to me.
3 days ago. That's why I sent you the message. He wants to see you, Caroline. He says it's finally safe. He's coming back." The room tilted around me. My heart pounded in my ears as I tried to process her words. My father, the man I had despised for years, the man I thought had abandoned me, was alive, was nearby, and wanted to see me. My entire life had been built on a lie meant to protect me, and now the truth was crashing down like an avalanche. Aunt Linda reached over and squeezed Mom's hand, as though lending her strength. I stared at them both, fury and confusion battling inside me. And what if he's lying? What if it's not safe? What if this puts us all in danger again? Mom's eyes filled with fresh tears. That's what I'm afraid of. But he swore to me it's different this time, that the people who hunted him are gone. Caroline, he wants a chance to explain everything, to finally be your father. I felt the floor shift beneath me. For so many years I had dreamed of coming home to stability, to the certainty of family. Instead, I was standing on a fault line of secrets that threatened to tear it all apart. And for the first time, I realized this Christmas homecoming wouldn't just be about reunion. It would be about confronting the truth I never wanted to hear. I couldn't shake the heaviness that had settled over me after Mom's revelation. The words replayed in my head like an echo chamber. He never left you. He was forced to. He's been watching all this time. Every step I took around the house that day felt unsteady, like I was moving through a dream where nothing lined up with reality. I went outside for air, crunching through the snow in the backyard, where I had built snow forts as a kid. The frost stung my cheeks, grounding me in the present, but inside, I was unraveling. My father wasn't the man I thought he was, or at least not the absence I had made him out to be. The hatred and resentment I'd carried for years suddenly had nowhere to land, replaced by a gnawing confusion that unsettled me even more. Jake came bounding out onto the porch, a knitted hat too big for his head sliding down over his ears. "Caroline, want to help me build a snowman?" he called, his breath puffing in white clouds. His innocent grin tugged at me, and for a moment I envied him. His world still simple, unshaken by secrets. I managed a weak smile. "Maybe later, kiddo," I answered, trying to sound cheerful. "Got some things on my mind." He shrugged, unconcerned, and dashed off towards the yard. I leaned against the railing, staring at the line of trees beyond the fence. They stood tall and silent, their bare branches stark against the winter sky. I wondered if, in some of those shadows, my father had once stood watching me. The thought made my stomach twist. Was he nearby even now? Was he waiting for the right moment to step back into my life?
When I went back inside, Aunt Linda was in the living room, folding laundry. She looked up at me, her eyes sharp with understanding. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said gently, "but your mom didn't make this decision lightly. She kept it from you because she thought she had no choice." I sat on the couch, running a hand through my hair. I don't even know who he is anymore. How do I even begin to process that he's been watching me all these years without a word? How do I trust any of it? Aunt Linda set the folded towel aside and leaned forward, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to trust it all right away. You just have to listen. Hear him out. The truth has a way of cutting through the noise if you're brave enough to face it." Her words echoed the lessons I'd learned in the army. When faced with uncertainty, gather intelligence, observe, and adapt. Still, this wasn't a battlefield. It was my family. The lines felt blurrier here, the stakes more personal. Later that afternoon, I slipped into the attic, a place I hadn't been since high school. The wooden steps groaned under my weight as I pulled the string for the single dangling bulb. Dust floated in the beam of light, settling over boxes stacked high. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe some piece of evidence that would make sense of Mom's confession. I opened one box after another. Old yearbooks, my childhood toys, faded Christmas decorations. Then, tucked beneath a pile of photo albums, I found a shoebox sealed with yellowing tape. My pulse quickened as I pried it open. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bundled together with twine. The handwriting was unfamiliar but careful, and each envelope was addressed to my mom. The return addresses varied,
always different cities, sometimes even different states. My hands trembled as I pulled one free and unfolded it. "Dear Emily," it began, my mother's name. "I know you can't write back, and I know I can't be there, but please tell Caroline that I love her. Tell her I'm proud of her, even if she never knows the truth about me. One day, when it's safe, I'll make it right." The letter blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I rifled through the stack, scanning fragments from different years. Mentions of my school plays, my graduation, even my enlistment into the army. He had known. He had followed every milestone, even if from a distance. These weren't the words of a man who abandoned his family. They were the words of someone trapped, trying desperately to stay connected from the shadows. Footsteps creaked behind me, and I quickly turned. Mom stood at the top of the attic stairs, her face pale. "You weren't supposed to find those," she whispered. I held up one of the letters, my voice breaking. "So it's true. All this time he was writing to you, and you never told me?" Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped closer. "I kept them because they were all I had left of him. I wanted to tell you so many times, Caroline, but every letter was a reminder of the danger. If I showed you, if you tried to find him—" "Danger from who?" I demanded. She hesitated, her lips pressed into a thin line. "People he got mixed up with years ago. They weren't just criminals. They were dangerous, powerful, the kind of people who don't forgive debts. He was trying to shield us by staying away." I sank onto an old trunk, the letter still clutched in my hand. The weight of it was overwhelming. My father's absence wasn't abandonment. It was sacrifice. And my mother had carried that burden alone, letting me believe a lie so I could grow up free of fear. "I don't know if I can forgive you, either of you. Him for leaving, you for lying. But I need answers. I need to see him." Mom's voice trembled, but there was a spark of resolve in her eyes. "You'll have that chance. He's supposed to come tomorrow night. He asked to meet us, all of us, at the old Miller barn outside town. He said it's private, safe." The attic seemed to shrink around me, the dust-filled air pressing heavy on my chest. Tomorrow night, my father, the ghost of my childhood, the man I'd hated and longed for all at once, was about to step out of the shadows. And whether I was ready or not, the truth would no longer be avoidable. The night before the meeting at the Miller barn stretched out endlessly, every tick of the clock on the living room wall drilling deeper into my nerves. I tried to sleep, but only tossed beneath the heavy quilt on my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling where faint cracks ran like veins. My father, whom I hadn't seen since I was a toddler, whom I had painted as a deserter, a coward, was about to reappear. It wasn't just anticipation that gnawed at me. It was fear. Fear of what I'd say when I saw him. Fear of whether he'd even feel like my father at all. Fear of what truths would rushing in once his face, voice, and presence shattered the carefully built lie I had lived inside. I kept hearing Mom's words over and over. "He was forced to leave. He's been watching you. He's coming tomorrow."
When morning finally broke, the world outside was covered in a clean layer of fresh snow. It should have felt peaceful, but instead, the sight was too sharp, too quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I helped Aunt Linda prepare breakfast, more for the distraction than anything else, though my hands shook as I tried to whisk eggs. Jake bounded into the kitchen, cheerful as always, oblivious to the storm roiling under the surface of our family. He chattered about how his snowman had fallen overnight and how he wanted to build a bigger one. I envied his simplicity. For him, tomorrow meant Christmas. For me, tomorrow meant finally looking my father in the eye and demanding the truth. By late afternoon, I couldn't handle the waiting. I pulled on my boots and went for a walk down the narrow road that led to the old Miller property. The barn was about a mile away, its faded red walls still standing despite decades of neglect. I wanted to see it beforehand, to imagine the setting where this confrontation would unfold. As I trudged through the snow,
The air bit at my lungs, but the physical sting was a relief against the whirl of emotions. The barn loomed ahead, larger than I remembered, its doors crooked but still intact. The surrounding fields were blanketed in white, an expanse of silence stretching in every direction. It was remote, private, perfect for the kind of secret meeting my father had asked for. I stood there for a long time, staring at the weathered structure, imagining him inside. Would he look like me? Would I see myself in his eyes, his posture, his expression? Or would he feel like a stranger? The resentment I had carried since childhood wrestled with the curiosity that now burned stronger than ever. I had spent years in the army learning how to size people up in seconds, but I wasn't sure how to apply that skill to the man who had defined and shattered so much of my identity. That night at dinner, Mom barely touched her food. Her eyes flicked to me often, as though searching for signs of how I was holding up. Finally, after Jake went to bed, I confronted her again. "Mom, what if he doesn't give me the answers I need? What if this is just another half-truth, another way to string me along?" She set her fork down and took a long breath. "Caroline, I don't expect you to forgive him right away. I don't even expect you to forgive me. But I know this. You deserve to hear him out. You've carried this anger for too long. It's time you lay it down and face what really happened." Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Maybe she was right. I had spent years letting anger drive me, fuel me, even comfort me. What if that anger had been built on a false foundation? If so, then who was I without it? When dawn came the next day, my heart thudded with the weight of what lay ahead. The hours passed slowly. Aunt Linda kept Jake busy, baking cookies and watching holiday movies, while I paced restlessly around the house. By late afternoon, Mom came to me, her face pale but resolute. She said, "It's time," she said softly. We bundled up and drove in silence. The car headlights cut through the snowy dusk, illuminating the winding road toward the Miller barn. My fingers tapped anxiously against my knee, every mile intensifying the knot in my stomach. When the barn finally came into view, its shadow stretching across the snow, I felt my breath hitch. Mom pulled the car to a stop a short distance away. The only sound was the engine ticking as it cooled. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the icy ground. The barn door was slightly ajar, a faint golden glow spilling through the crack. Someone was already inside. My pulse quickened, my breath clouding in the air. Mom touched my arm. "Remember, whatever happens in there, he loves you. He always has." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. My legs felt heavy as I approached the door, pushing it open slowly. The hinges creaked, echoing through the cavernous space. Inside, lanterns hung from wooden beams, casting flickering light across the old hayloft. The smell of dust and wood filled the air. And then I saw him. He stood near the center, hands clasped in front of him, shoulders squared. His hair was streaked with gray, his face weathered by years of hardship, but his eyes, sharp, familiar, locked onto mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was so complete I could hear the soft crackle of the lantern flames. "Caroline," he said finally, his voice low, steady, and achingly familiar. "You've grown into everything I ever hoped you'd be." The sound of my name on his lips sent a jolt through me, tearing down years of imagined scenarios and replacing them with stark reality. This was him, my father, flesh and blood. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "You don't get to say that," I shot back, my voice trembling with equal parts rage and grief. "You weren't here. You missed everything. You left us." Pain flickered across his face, but he didn't flinch. "I know, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to explain if you let me. But I promise you this, Caroline, I never abandon you. I've been fighting to keep you safe since the day I walked out that door."
The weight of his words crashed over me, colliding with the letters I had found, the stories Mom had told, and the ache in my chest that never went away. For years, I had begged for this moment. Now that it was here, I didn't know whether to embrace him or turn and run. But one thing was certain. The truth was no longer a shadow. It was standing in front of me, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. The barn smelled of hay, lantern smoke, and something faintly metallic, a scent that seemed to carry the weight of years of secrets. I stood frozen, staring at him as he shifted slightly, his hands unclasping to gesture toward a wooden bench near the back. "Sit," he said quietly, almost like a command, yet gentle enough to leave me the choice. My legs felt like lead, but I obeyed, sliding onto the bench with a mixture of caution and curiosity. He leaned against the wall across from me, eyes searching mine as if gauging whether I was ready to hear everything. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, each beat echoing the anxiety I had carried for years, and yet a part of me ached with anticipation. Finally, the story I had longed for, the truth of why he had vanished, was about to unfold. "My leaving wasn't what you think," he began, his voice steady but low, filled with a kind of tired weight that spoke more than words ever could. "I didn't walk away. I was forced out, by people who didn't want us safe, by people who wanted leverage over me. Your mom has only ever tried to protect you, and in doing so, I had to stay hidden. I couldn't risk your life, Caroline." I swallowed hard, trying to push past the swelling anger and disbelief. "You left me. You left Mom. You left everything. I grew up thinking you hated us, that you didn't care." My voice cracked with the years of resentment I had hoarded like armor. He flinched at my words, but didn't retreat. "I understand why you feel that way, and I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask that you hear me. The people I got tangled with, they weren't ordinary criminals. They were ruthless, powerful, and violent. I had to disappear or risk not only my life, but yours and your mother's. Every letter, every attempt to reach your mom without endangering you was all I had." I glanced down at the letters I had found in the attic, the thin paper bundles that had kept a thread of connection alive between us. "All of this," I whispered, holding one out. "All these years, you really did watch. You were there. In some way." His eyes softened, and a flicker of relief crossed his weathered face. "Every milestone, every birthday, your first day of school, your graduation, even when you enlisted. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped hoping you would understand one day. But it had to be like this. I had no choice." A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp with disbelief. "No choice? You expect me to just accept that? You expect me to forgive years of pain and loneliness because someone threatened you?" He shook his head slowly, exhaustion in every movement. "I don't expect it. I don't even expect you to trust me yet. But listen, there are things you don't know. Dangerous things. People I crossed years ago have long memories. They know who you are, and they would have used you to get to me. That's why I stayed hidden, even when it broke me to leave you behind." The weight of his words pressed against me like snow in the dead of winter. Danger, secrets, sacrifice. The father I had built up in my mind as a ghost, a failure, was actually a man caught in a storm I could barely comprehend. And yet the absence of him had shaped
everything about my life. The anger that drove me through army training, the nights I cried for a father I thought didn't care, the years I spent building walls around my heart. Now each revelation threatened to dismantle the structure I had relied on to survive. He moved closer, and I noticed the tremor in his hands, the vulnerability he tried to hide behind the composed expression. "Caroline," he said, voice softening, "I had to make impossible choices to keep you safe. Every day away from you, every lie I allowed your mom to tell, it broke me. I've carried guilt like a wound that never heals. And now I'm here, hoping you'll let me explain the rest. The sacrifices, the dangers, everything I had to endure so that you could live free." I stared at him, anger, grief, and longing swirling together. My father, real, alive, painfully human, was no longer just a figure in my memories or the letters I had clutched like lifelines. He was tangible, flawed, burdened by choices I couldn't imagine making. And yet his presence made the distance of the past collapse, revealing not only what I had lost, but what could still be gained if I allowed it.
He began to recount the details of his forced disappearance, the people he had crossed, the threats he had narrowly escaped. It was shocking, terrifying even. The names, the networks, the shadowy deals, all of it painting a world I had never known existed, a world I had been kept safe from. He described long nights in hiding, moving constantly, leaving false trails and relying on a network of trusted allies who had helped him stay one step ahead. And through it all, his love for me had never faltered, not once. Each story he told shattered my preconceived notions, each revelation a brick removed from the wall of resentment I had built. And with each story, a faint understanding began to take root. The man I had hated was not a coward. He was a protector, a father navigating a dangerous world alone, forced to sacrifice his presence for my safety. By the time he finished, night had fallen completely over the barn. The lanterns flickered, casting shadows across the walls. But there was no fear in the room anymore, only the undeniable proof of his sacrifice, his love, and the years he had endured silently. I didn't know what I was going to do with this truth yet, whether forgiveness would come or how it might reshape my heart. But one thing was certain. The story I had carried in my mind about my father, about my family, had been completely rewritten. And for the first time in years, the weight I had borne alone felt lighter, because the hidden truth was finally in front of me. The wind had picked up as we left the barn, sending icy gusts across the open fields that surrounded the Miller property. The snow, which had seemed peaceful the night before, now whipped against my face like an invisible hand, reminding me of how exposed we were, not just physically but emotionally. My father's stories had settled like a weight in my chest, both grounding and disorienting me. I had heard truths I wasn't sure I was ready to fully process, and the responsibility of what came next pressed heavily on my shoulders. Mom's hand found mine as we walked back toward the car, her grip both comforting and urgent, and I realized that whatever came, we would be facing it together, but not without consequences. Back in the warmth of the house, the tension was palpable. Aunt Linda had prepared a small dinner, hoping it would soothe the frayed nerves, but the silence between bites was deafening. Jake poked at his food, oblivious to the storm swirling around us, but I could feel Mom's unease like a live wire sparking under the table. She glanced at me once, her eyes filled with worry, as if silently reminding me that the most difficult conversations were still to come. I swallowed, feeling my throat dry, and forced myself to speak. "We need to talk about what happens now, about safety, about the people you mentioned." My father, seated across from me, nodded solemnly. "He was hoping you'd bring that up," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a tension there I hadn't noticed before, the kind that comes from someone who has faced danger so many times they can predict its arrival. They know who I am. They know who you are. And though I thought the threat had passed,
I've reason to believe that some of those people may still be active. It's unlikely, but we cannot ignore it. Mom's hand tightened around mine. I never wanted to scare you, Caroline. That's why we kept things secret for so long. But now that he's here, it's no longer a choice. You deserve to know the truth, and you need to understand the stakes. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing their words. The adrenaline from the barn encounter still pulsed in my veins, and now the reality of looming danger made my stomach churn. This wasn't just a story about long-lost family or a father returning after years in hiding. It was about survival, legacy, and trust in its rawest form. The people my father had faced weren't simply criminals. They were calculated, relentless, and driven by motives that didn't care who got hurt in the process. And suddenly, the idyllic notion of a Christmas reunion felt fragile, hanging by threads that could snap at any moment. I ran my hands over my face, trying to calm the storm inside. So, what do we do? How do we prepare? My father leaned forward, elbows on the table, his eyes locking with mine. We gather information, we verify contacts, we track movements. There are people I've trusted for years who can help us understand if the threat is real or if it's just residual fear. You've trained for situations like this. You know how to assess risk, how to act under pressure. That's why I wanted you here first, to ensure you have a say in how we move forward. The way he looked at me, earnest, imploring, but burdened by years of experience, stirred something fierce inside me. I realized that the same instincts I had relied on in the army, the ones that had kept me alive in faraway deserts and foreign firefights, were now relevant at home, in the place I thought I understood the most. My hands, once steady under combat pressure, shook slightly now, not from fear, but from the enormity of responsibility.
Mom reached over, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "We also need to be cautious with everyone around us," she said softly. "I've kept this circle small for years. Aunt Linda, Jake, and you. I need you all safe. That means discretion, vigilance, and clear communication. There's no room for error." Aunt Linda, usually the warmest and most comforting presence in the house, spoke up with a rare edge in her voice. "I've been watching the neighborhood. People come and go. There's been someone taking interest in the house. Small things, subtle, but enough to raise my suspicion. I didn't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily, but now, with him here, I think we can't ignore it anymore." My stomach twisted. Someone had been watching us. Maybe they had always been there, shadows at the edges of our lives, waiting for a moment to strike. My father's calm exterior, the steadiness he projected despite years of danger, did little to settle the gnawing anxiety in me. I had survived firefights, ambushes, and life-or-death scenarios, but this was different. This was close to home, personal. Every moment could ripple outward, affecting everyone I loved. He stood, moving toward the window, and peering out at the falling snow. "We're going to create a plan. We'll start with who can be trusted, then map out potential vulnerabilities. We'll gather evidence and keep watch. The key is to remain calm but proactive, Caroline. I need you sharp, I need you focused, and I need you to trust me, even if it's difficult." I nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility pressing down, but also a spark of resolve igniting within me. This wasn't just about family reconciliation anymore. It was about confronting the threats that had lurked in the shadows, facing the hidden dangers, and taking control of a situation that could have consumed us all. I realized that understanding the truth meant more than just hearing the story. It meant acting on it, standing firm, and protecting what we had regained. The night stretched long, and we strategized quietly, speaking in hushed tones, checking doors and windows, and mapping out contingencies. Each plan we made, each precaution we discussed, felt like a small victory against the invisible pressure bearing down on us. And yet, beneath it all, there was an undeniable tension, a sense that the confrontation was only beginning. The truth had emerged, but it had brought with it a new and mounting pressure, a reminder that the cost of secrecy, sacrifice, and protection
could extend far beyond the past. By the time I went to bed, exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but I couldn't sleep. My mind raced through possibilities, threats, and contingencies. The hidden world my father had lived in, the shadows that had stalked him and now me, made it clear that the holiday I had anticipated as a joyful reunion had become the setting for something much larger, far more dangerous. The confrontation with the past and the enemies of the past was approaching, and the stakes had never been higher. The hours after our planning session felt like a slow march through a storm that wasn't just outside, but inside me as well. Sleep refused me, no matter how heavy my body felt. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows made my chest tighten with the weight of anticipation and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows from my father's past were inching closer, testing the perimeter of our safety, pressing on the fragile sense of security Mom and Aunt Linda had painstakingly maintained for years. Even Jake, oblivious in his bedroom, seemed to sense the tension in the air, and I found myself glancing repeatedly at his closed door, imagining worst-case scenarios that clawed at my mind. By morning, I was a bundle of restless energy and gnawing anxiety. My father had stayed up most of the night, reviewing plans, maps, and old contacts. He looked calm, composed, but I could see the fine lines of stress around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw. It was unnerving how someone who had faced danger for decades could appear so collected, while I felt unsteady at every step. Mom moved silently around the kitchen, brewing coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she poured. The warmth of the room did little to chase away the frost that had crept into my heart overnight. This was no ordinary day. The peace I had imagined for my Christmas homecoming was gone, replaced with a palpable tension that coiled tight around every thought. I tried to distract myself with chores, anything to occupy my mind. I swept the floors, folded laundry, and even attempted to organize the living room, but each noise outside, branches scraping against the windows, the distant crunch of snow, felt like a potential threat. My father noticed my agitation and came to sit beside me. "Caroline," he said, voice low, "I know this is a lot. I know you're scared. But fear won't protect us. It can only paralyze." I wanted to nod, but to accept his calm as a lifeline, but the reality of our vulnerability was overwhelming. I've survived firefights, ambushes, and long patrols overseas, and I feel more exposed here at home than I ever did in the desert. How is that possible?
He didn't answer immediately, only looked at me with steady eyes. Because this is different. Out there, danger was expected. Here, it's personal. Here, it's home. And home is supposed to be safe. That makes the threat harder to face. I couldn't argue with that. Every instinct I had relied on in the army was screaming at me. Yet nothing could prepare me for the emotional weight of this battle. It wasn't bullets or bombs. It was secrecy, lies, and the looming presence of people whose reach I couldn't see. And beneath it all was the tension between longing and anger, a desire to embrace the father I had finally met, tempered by years of resentment and betrayal. By midday, the first tangible sign of danger arrived. Aunt Linda's phone buzzed sharply, and her face paled as she glanced at the screen. "It's someone asking about Caroline," she whispered. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to sound calm. My stomach dropped. "Who?" I asked, my pulse spiking. "They didn't say," she replied, eyes darting nervously toward the windows. "But they know you're here. They're asking questions, and I think they're serious." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of vigilance. I moved from window to window, scanning the snowy landscape for any sign of movement. Every shadow, every flicker of light felt like an intruder waiting for the right moment. My father stayed close, guiding me, offering strategies, but even his presence couldn't completely soothe the gnawing anxiety inside me. Mom and Aunt Linda tried to keep things normal, offering tea, gentle conversation, even jokes. But I couldn't shake the sense that the safety of our family was unraveling thread by thread. As evening approached, the tension escalated. A sudden knock at the door made my heart leap into my throat. I moved cautiously, signaling to my father before opening it a crack. No one was there, just a small envelope slid under the door. My hands shook as I picked it up, tearing it open. Inside was a single card with a stark message, scrawled in familiar, deliberate handwriting. "He's vulnerable now. Don't let your guard down." I staggered back, my mind racing. The warning wasn't cryptic, it was personal. My father's eyes hardened, and a rare edge of anger crept into his voice. "They're testing us. He knows I'm here, and they want to see how quickly we react. They want to intimidate us, to make you feel powerless." I clenched my fists, feeling the anger and fear coiling inside me. For years, I had believed in black and white threats, enemies you could see, confront, and neutralize. But this was different. This was a test of endurance, patience, and psychological resilience. Every second of hesitation, every shadow that went unchecked, could cost us dearly. The night dragged on, each creak of the house, each gust of wind outside a potential harbinger of intrusion. I barely slept, haunted by the thought that revealing the truth had brought danger not only to my father, but to all of us. I thought about the letters, the barn, the reunion, all the moments that had seemed so full of hope, and realized that understanding the truth had a price. Sometimes the greatest revelations came with the heaviest consequences. By the time the first light of dawn broke, I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. My father watched me quietly, aware of the toll the night had taken. Mom held my hand, silent but steadfast. The letters, the barn, the warnings, they had all shown me the truth of my father's sacrifices, but they had also revealed the cost of confronting the hidden dangers that lurked just out of sight. And in that moment, I understood something vital. Truth was not just a balm for old wounds, it was a responsibility. Carrying it meant confronting consequences, facing fear, and standing firm even when every fiber of your being wanted to retreat. By the time evening rolled around, the tension that had been building for days reached a point where it could no longer be contained. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the landscape outside a stark, silent white, but the stillness was deceptive, a fragile cover over the storm that had descended on our family. My father, Mom, Aunt Linda, Jake, and I gathered in the living room, our makeshift command center, for what felt like an inevitable confrontation. Maps were spread across the coffee table, lists of contacts and potential threats scrawled in my father's neat handwriting, and small improvised barricades lined the doors and windows. Every movement, every plan was calculated to maximize safety while preparing for the worst-case scenario. My body hummed with a combination of adrenaline and dread, a familiar sensation that in the past had signaled life-or-death situations in distant countries, but now it pulsed in the heart of my childhood home. I could feel Jake's unease, despite his attempts to appear unconcerned. He fidgeted with his gloves, glancing up at the adults for reassurance, and I tried to offer a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The stakes had never been higher. Not in the desert during missions I thought were the most dangerous of my life. Not in any battle I'd faced overseas. This was home. This was personal, and the truth we had unearthed about my father's past had brought consequences directly into our lives. The envelope left under the door earlier that day was a stark reminder someone knew, someone was watching, and someone wanted to test our limits. The first sign that the confrontation was imminent came in a low, methodical knock at the front door. Everyone froze, breaths held, eyes darting to one another. My father motioned for silence, his expression unreadable. He crept to the door, scanning the peephole, and whispered, "It's them. They're here." My chest tightened, and I felt the familiar surge of tension I had trained to harness in high-stress combat situations. But now it was infused with fear for my family, for the people I loved most. This wasn't a controlled exercise. This was raw, real danger at our doorstep. He opened the door slightly, just enough to confront the first of the intruders. A shadowy figure loomed, masked and imposing, and I felt my stomach drop as I realized how close the threat had gotten. My father's voice was calm, firm, a shield of authority. "You've come too far. Turn back now, or you'll regret it." The figure hesitated just long enough for my pulse to spike before retreating into the darkness.
But the reprieve was brief. More shadows emerged, more shapes moving silently across the snowy yard, testing the perimeter, probing for weaknesses. Adrenaline surged through me, snapping every muscle into tension. My father turned to me, his eyes locking with mine. "Caroline, it's time. We execute the plan we prepared. You know what to do." The training I had relied on for years overseas kicked in automatically. Movements became deliberate, precise, securing doors, checking windows, positioning ourselves in a defensive formation. Aunt Linda and Warren followed his instructions with surprising composure, their fear tempered by necessity. Even Jake, small and wide-eyed, was guided to a safe spot near the back of the house. Every second counted. Every decision a potential pivot between safety and catastrophe. The intruders tried to breach the front entrance, and my father met them head-on, leveraging years of combat experience and the element of surprise. The shadows flitted between cover and attack, but he anticipated their moves with uncanny precision, using both strategic positioning and psychological pressure to keep them off balance. I moved alongside him, my training and instincts guiding my actions as we coordinated silently, a shared rhythm of defense. The tension was almost unbearable, the sound of crunching snow, the distant echo of voices, the wind whipping through gaps in the house, yet every second of focus sharpened our determination. At one point, a figure broke from the main group, heading toward the basement. My father barked a warning and I intercepted it, heart pounding, body poised to act. The confrontation escalated quickly, a test of nerves, skill, and the clarity of mind under extreme pressure. We forced the intruders into retreat, using barricades, calculated maneuvers, and the intimidating presence of my father to assert control. The adrenaline, though draining, left a sense of cohesion, a realization that the family I had thought fractured could function as a unit under duress. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into a single breathless evening, the intruders withdrew, retreating into the darkness from which they had emerged. The house was quiet, but the silence was heavy, a stark contrast to the storm of conflict that had just passed. My father collapsed into a chair, exhausted but alert, eyes scanning the perimeter for lingering threats. Mom moved to me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder, and Aunt Linda exhaled a long, tense breath. Even Jake emerged from his hiding spot, hugging me tightly, sensing the end of danger but not fully understanding its magnitude. The reality of what had occurred settled over us like snow. The confrontation had tested not only our physical abilities, but our courage, our trust, and the bonds of family. We had faced a threat that could have shattered everything. Yet through preparation, unity, and sheer determination, we had endured. And in that endurance, a deeper truth emerged, one that was more profound than any letter or story. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it, even when the odds seem insurmountable, even when the shadows of the past threaten to consume you. I sank into the couch beside my father, the warmth of the room a fragile comfort against the cold night outside. The danger was not entirely gone, I knew that. But for the first time in years, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel. Hope. Hope that truth, courage, and family could prevail even in the face of threats that once seemed insurmountable. And as I looked at the people who had stood beside me, who had fought with me, protected me, and trusted me, I realized that this Christmas, the gift we had all received was more than survival. It was the rediscovery of love, trust, and the undeniable power of truth made manifest. Morning broke over the snow-covered landscape, but it felt different than before. The storm outside had passed, leaving a pale winter sun that reflected off the white fields, and inside, the atmosphere was heavier with relief than tension. The house, which had been a fortress the night before, now felt like home again, though forever altered by the events we had endured. My father, Mom, Aunt Linda, Jake, and I gathered around a kitchen table, cups of steaming coffee warming our hands, as the reality of the previous night began to sink in. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a mixture of exhaustion and clarity. We were alive, together, and, most importantly, prepared to face whatever came next.
The intruders had been a wake-up call,
A tangible confirmation that the threats my father had feared were not just shadows or memories, but real dangers still reaching toward us. Yet, in the quiet of morning, I realized that the confrontation had achieved something deeper than merely repelling a physical threat. It had revealed the strength of our family unit, the resilience of bonds forged not just through shared DNA, but through trust, courage, and the willingness to stand together in the face of fear. My father, once a distant figure in my life, was now tangible, present, and undeniably part of this family. His presence no longer carried the weight of abandonment, but of protection and love, tested and proven in the crucible of adversity. Mom poured me a cup of coffee, her hand still trembling slightly. "You were incredible last night," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "I've never seen you like that. So calm, so focused. I know it wasn't just training. It was instinct, heart, and courage all at once." I tried to smile, but the exhaustion was catching up with me, the weight of what had happened pressing down in a new way. "We all did what we had to," I said quietly. "It wasn't just me. We worked together. We survived together." My father nodded, the lines in his face softening in the morning light. "You've grown into someone I am proud of, someone capable of facing the unimaginable without losing your humanity," he said. "And that is something no one can take away from you. Not fear, not threats, not the years we spent apart." His words struck a chord, a resonance that filled the hollow spaces I had carried for so long. For years, I had framed him as absent, as negligent. But the truth, his sacrifices, his vigilance, his silent protection, was more profound than any resentment I had harbored. Aunt Linda, usually the steady anchor of the household, allowed herself a rare smile. "I think we all underestimated what we could handle," she admitted. "We faced real danger last night, and we came through it not just intact, but stronger. Maybe that's the lesson here. We're more capable than we often give ourselves credit for." Her words felt like a balm, affirming that courage wasn't just about combat or survival, but about family, trust, and the willingness to confront life's challenges together. Jake, still bundled in his winter pajamas, climbed onto my lap. "Are the bad guys gone for good?" he asked, eyes wide. I hugged him tightly, the warmth of his small body grounding me. "Yes, Jake, they're gone. And we're safe. That's what matters." The simplicity of his perspective reminded me of why we had endured the night before. Not for glory, not for revenge, but for safety, for the ability to live fully without fear, for the love of family. By mid-morning, we began to take stock of the aftermath. The snow outside had been disturbed only slightly by the retreating intruders, evidence that their presence had been temporary, a test rather than a sustained assault. My father made calls to trusted contacts, confirming that the threats had indeed dissipated, at least for now. Each phone call, each verification, reinforced a sense of security we hadn't felt in years. And with that security came a new clarity. The truth we had uncovered about his past, about his sacrifices, was no longer just a revelation. It was a foundation for the life we could build from this point forward. Sitting down with my father later in the day, I found myself asking the questions I have avoided for years. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you come back sooner? His expression was somber, filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. Because I had to protect you, he said simply. Every choice I made, every year I spent away, was about keeping you and your mother safe. I couldn't risk exposure. I couldn't risk losing you to the same dangers I had faced. And now that the threat has passed, I can finally be part of your life in a way I always wanted to. The clarity of his explanation didn't erase the pain of the years apart, but it contextualized it, transforming the narrative of abandonment into one of protection, sacrifice, and love. I realized that understanding the truth didn't just heal wounds, it empowered me. I could finally release the anger that had weighed me down, replacing it with a nuanced comprehension of the complex, dangerous choices my father had faced.
By evening, the house was quieter, the adrenaline of the past night replaced by a calm vigilance. We sat together, sharing a meal that felt heavier with meaning than any holiday feast before. Conversations flowed more freely, laughter punctuating moments that had previously been tense or uncertain. It wasn't perfection, and the memory of danger still lingered, but the bonds between us had been strengthened in a way that nothing else could have achieved. For the first time in my life, I felt that the concept of family wasn't tied to proximity or uninterrupted presence. It was tied to resilience, trust, and the willingness to stand together even when the world outside was threatening, even when the past had been painful. We had faced the consequences of truth, endured fear, and emerged on the other side, not only intact but transformed. And in that transformation lay the quiet power of redemption, the ability to finally embrace the life we had always deserved.
The following morning, the sun rose slowly over the snow-dusted hills surrounding our house, casting long golden streaks across the windows and illuminating the warmth of the home that had survived so much. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine and the promise of a peaceful day after the storm of the previous nights. I stepped outside onto the porch, inhaling deeply, feeling the cold bite of winter against my cheeks, but also the undeniable sense of calm that had settled over our family. For the first time in years, the chaos of secrets, danger, and uncertainty felt like it was finally behind us. My father joined me, his presence steady and reassuring, and we stood together in silence, taking in the landscape and the quiet victory that came not from fighting shadows, but from surviving them together. Inside, Mom and Aunt Linda were bustling in the kitchen, but there was a lightness to their movements, a softness that hadn't been there before. Laughter floated through the air, warm and unrestrained, as Jake ran in circles between the rooms, his excitement a simple reminder that life could still be joyful even after fear had visited so deeply. The house that had felt like a fortress just days before now felt like a sanctuary, a place of healing and renewal, rather than one of tension and vigilance. I realized that the truth, though difficult and heavy, had been liberating. It had reshaped our family, allowing us to confront the past and reclaim the present in a way that nothing else could have done. Sitting at the breakfast table, I watched my father interact with Mom and Aunt Linda, noticing the subtle ways in which trust had been rebuilt. There were no walls between them now, no lingering suspicions or unspoken fears. Even the letters he had left over the years, once symbols of distance and secrecy, now represented threads of connection that had held us together despite time and danger. Each smile, each shared glance, carried the weight of reconciliation and the promise of a future that was finally ours to shape. I found myself reflecting on my own transformation, the journey that had brought me from resentment and confusion to understanding and empowerment. The years in the Army, the experiences I had endured, and the training that had prepared me for life or death situations overseas had all been critical, but nothing had tested me like the revelation of my father's past and the threats that followed. I realized that courage was not only about facing external dangers, but also about confronting truths that could unsettle your very foundation. Standing with him now, I felt a sense of pride in not only surviving, but in embracing the complexity of our lives, the shades of sacrifice, love, and resilience that defined us. Later in the day, I ventured into the barn again, this time without fear or urgency. The space that had been the site of confession and revelation now felt sacred, a place where hidden truths had been confronted and understanding had been forged. I ran my hands along the worn wood beams, recalling the night my father had recounted his sacrifices, the threats he had faced, and the lengths he had gone to keep us safe. It was humbling to realize that heroism often comes quietly, without recognition, and that the greatest acts of courage sometimes occur in the shadows, away from the eyes of the world. As evening approached, we gathered by the fireplace, the warm glow of the flames dancing across our faces. The tension that had haunted us for weeks had dissolved, replaced by a collective sense of relief and unity.
My father spoke softly, recounting some of the lighter moments of his time away. Stories he had never shared before for fear of alarming us. We laughed together, the sound filling the house and chasing away the remnants of fear. In that moment, I understood that the bonds of family were not simply about proximity or presence. They were about honesty, resilience, and the willingness to stand together in the face of adversity. I looked around at each of them, Mom's serene smile, Aunt Linda's gentle eyes, Jake's bright excitement, and my father's steadfast presence, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had endured threats, uncovered hidden truths, and faced the shadows of the past, yet we had emerged stronger, more united, and more aware of the value of courage, love, and trust. I realized that our lives had been transformed not by the absence of danger, but by the way we chose to confront it together. As night fell, I stepped outside one last time, watching the stars glimmer over the snowy fields. The silence was no longer foreboding, but peaceful, a symbol of the new life we had claimed for ourselves. I knew that challenges would come again, as they always do, but I also knew that we were ready. We had faced hidden truths, survived their consequences, and emerged with the knowledge that courage, honesty, and family could withstand even the most daunting storms. In that quiet moment, I felt a profound sense of closure and empowerment. The Christmas I had feared would be overshadowed by secrets and danger instead had become a testament to resilience, love, and the enduring power of truth.
And as I stepped back inside to join them, I understood that our story was no longer defined by absence, fear, or uncertainty. It was defined by the courage to face what had been hidden, the choice to protect and love, and the transformation that comes from embracing both the pain and the beauty of life. This was more than a reunion. It was a rebirth. And together, we were ready to write the next chapter of our lives, stronger, united, and unafraid. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.